Good morning, everyone. So it looks like the Zoom invite did not copy into the email. So thank you, Danielle, for bringing that to my attention. Sorry, I had to do that on the fly really fast. Okay, so today we'll have a little slower of a start to allow everyone to find the Zoom link. I just posted it in Canvas. It's also on the Zoom tab, so hopefully I'm monitoring my email to make sure that everybody's got it. So we need Olivia. I don't see Olivia. I see Vincent. There's Vincent. And Brian just emailed me that he was running a little bit late. So maybe what I'll do instead is we'll go ahead and start the lecture. And then at the end of lecture, we'll take the quiz from last week with the Jeopardy champions to give them a little more time to sign on. So just a few announcements before we get started. This is the last lecture before our midterm, but we have a week of policy brief workshops before our midterm. So what I'd like to do is have everybody schedule a one-on-one Zoom meeting with me sometime this week, this weekend, next week. Oh, there's Olivia. Or the following weekend. So we've got like a 2-week span, basically. I'd like everybody to schedule a one-on-one Zoom meeting with me to go over their policy brief. So it doesn't matter if you haven't started it yet. Let's still schedule a meeting. That way I can help you get started. So don't be ashamed, even if you don't have a topic. That's fine. That's the point of these meetings. Let me help you get started. So next week, we're not going to have classes. We're not going to have a Zoom class at all. So just make sure that you schedule a meeting with me sometime this week, this weekend, next week, or the following weekend. The other thing to note, in the module, I have posted the study guide for the midterm. So it's just a bulleted list of terms at this point. So what I'd like for you to do is fill that in. So you're going to use the book, your lecture notes, the PowerPoints, everything that you can to put as much information as you can underneath each bullet point of each topic. And then if you want to schedule a one-on-one Zoom meeting with me, I'm happy to edit your study guide for you. So I'll cross out anything that you don't need to know. I will let you know if something you have is incorrect. If you can't find a term, I'll help you find it. And I'm also happy to give you a little bit of a hint as to what the essay questions will be. I won't do that. Just if you email me the study guide, you have to set up a Zoom meeting with me and I'll go through your study guide for you. So I would try to schedule at least 2 meetings with me, one to go over your policy brief and one to go over your study guide. So do we have any questions about that? No questions? All right, so I haven't graded the quizzes. Oh, Stephen, do you have a question?
Yes and no. I apologize for being late to class, but on another note, I will be emailing you to schedule like a reoccurring meeting with my policy paper.
Okay, just send me an email and we'll set that up. So I haven't graded your quizzes yet. So if you don't see the grade from the 4th quiz yet, that is why. I'm going to be doing that today. All right, so like I said, one of our Jeopardy champions just emailed me. Brian said he's running a little late. So we're just going to go ahead and get started with the lecture. And then at the end of class, we will take our quiz. Or the Jeopardy champions will play for the quiz. All right. Any questions before we get started? All righty. That's not what I meant to click. Okay. Okay, so this week what we're going to be talking about is prisoner reentry. Last week we talked.
I'll be back.
Hello. Sounds like somebody's got their mic on. If we could make sure we mute that. So last week we talked about prison and the effects that that has on an inmate, specifically with inmate culture. And this week, what we're going to be talking about is prisoner reentry. Hello, Brian. We're going to do, glad you could make it. We're going to just do the quiz at the end of class, just so that we have everybody there. All right. So this week, what we're talking about is what happens once you get released from prison. So we're going to be talking about the collateral effects. So how prison affects people once they're released from prison, and then when they're trying to re-enter society, the effect that that has on them and the obstacles that they face. So the first part we're going to talk about are these collateral consequences, as well as a term that you're going to learn, invisible punishment. And then we're going to talk about two different parts of prisoner reentry: housing issues and work issues. So starting with just a little bit of an overview. So we're at kind of a crossing point in American crime and punishment. The rates of imprisonment are really high. At the same time, the crime rates are decreasing. So we have started to see a very slow decline in the crime rates, but the imprisonment rates, but it still remains really, really high. So some argue that this is exactly that it should be, and that the increased investments are being repaid in the benefits of reduced crime. But that logic is a little bit flawed. Because if that's the case, then the benefits of imprisonment are a lot less certain and a lot slower in arriving than expected. And a lot of people have not fully understood the extent of the costs, in that we are not properly counting the full extent of the cost that imprisonment has on people. So when people ask, what do you consider the cost of imprisonment? What do most people think of? If I ask you, what is the cost of imprisonment? What comes to mind?
How much we pay to keep an inmate.
Exactly. That's what most people think, is we're thinking of like a solid number. So like the 40 to 60 grand per person per year, that's usually what people think of when they think of the cost of incarceration. But that, if you're using that to create sort of a cost benefit analysis, your formula is incorrect, because there are all kinds of other collateral costs that aren't going into this sort of cost column. So especially when we start to look at the effect that it's having on the children, that it's having on the communities. And let's go through some of the costs that we're talking about here. So some of the costs that people don't consider when they think about the cost of incarceration, the first one is the loss of social capital. So social capital refers to the capacity of a person to call upon social ties or personal ties to advance some sort of personal interest. So a perfect example is when you graduate from college, you're going to want to get a job. When you graduate from college, as a college graduate, there are a lot of people that you can tap to help you find a job. So that might be your professors to write you a letter of recommendation. Or if you got an internship while you were in college, you could talk to that your employer as your intern supervisor to help you find a job. Or likely, if you're a college graduate, your parents probably had a job. So you can ask your parents and your parents' friends. Those are examples of social capital, calling upon personal ties to help you advance a personal interest. When you come out of prison, you have lost quite a bit of social capital because the type of people that you can call on to advance personal interests are usually other ex-cons or people that are not going to help you find legitimate employment. So ex-prisoners are in a particularly poor position to gain social capital, and a lot of them aren't trusted by many people around them. So that's one of the first costs that people don't consider when we're talking about the consequences of incarceration or the cost of incarceration. People don't put that loss of social capital into the cost column. The other thing that people don't consider is the stability of the communities in which they live. So it's common knowledge among criminal justice statisticians that within each state, a large majority of their prisoners are coming from and going back to just a few small communities. So we see an overrepresentation of people being pulled out to go to prison and then coming back into this community with all kinds of prison baggage. So for instance, it's estimated that 80% of the inmates in one large institution in New York State are coming from and going to just 7 communities in New York City. So incarceration affects these communities and the stability of these communities because so many of their young men are being pulled out, and these are young working aged males that are being pulled out to go and serve a term of incarceration, and then are being sent back worse than they were with a loss of social capital and all kinds of prison baggage. So they have a tough time finding a job. So this increases the unemployment rate in these communities. There are also a lot of police and parole officers hanging around because of so many ex-cons that live in these communities. So imprisonment damages these communities because these communities are overrepresented in terms of the people that are coming from prison and going to prison. Another thing that does not go into the cost column when we're creating this cost benefit analysis is the losses that are suffered by the families of those that are incarcerated. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about the spouses, boyfriends and girlfriends that are left behind, but also the children. And it's not just the financial burden that is left on these people left behind, but it's also it takes an emotional toil or an emotional toll on the children as well as the spouses and boyfriends and girlfriends that are left behind. The last cost that you kind of want to think about are other social institutions. And what I mean by that is that our nation spends billions of dollars on incarceration every year, and that is billions of dollars that we cannot be spending on other social institutions. So whether that be education or public housing or public assistance or recreational programs for children, all that money that we have to spend on incarceration, we then cannot spend on other social institutions. All right, so those are some of the collateral consequences that you have to consider that people just don't think about when they think about the cost of incarceration. Most of the time, like Thomas said, they just think, how much does it actually cost in terms of dollars and cents? But if you truly want to do a cost benefit analysis and understand the consequences, the collateral consequences of incarceration, these are a bunch of things that most people don't consider. So let's start talking about invisible punishment. So invisible punishment is punishment that continues after an inmate has been released. So this is a type of punishment that people are subjected to when they've already served their term of incarceration. So they've served their sentence, but simply because they have the label of a felon, they are restricted in other categories when they are released. So the new forms of invisible punishment that have emerged in the latter part of the 20th century are particularly disturbing because they really exacerbate the division between us as law-abiding citizens and those as lawbreakers. So people that are convicted of a felony typically confront restrictions on categories of employment. They often don't have access to the same public social benefits. They are often discriminated against in terms of public housing. They aren't eligible for the same educational benefits. Depending on the state that they live in, they often lose the right to vote. They can't serve on a jury. A lot of times criminal history is public knowledge, meaning they are discriminated against in a lot of different ways. So the reason that this is important is that most people ask the question, well, when you get out of prison, why wouldn't you just clean up your life? Why wouldn't you do everything that you could to avoid going back to prison? And a lot of times it's because these sources of invisible punishment make it a lot harder than the average person realizes to assimilate back into a pro-social lifestyle after they've been incarcerated. So let's just talk about restrictions on categories of employment. So this varies by state. Each state determines what types of jobs you are ineligible to do if you have the label of felon. So in California, there are roughly 261 jobs that make you ineligible if you're a felon. In New York State, you cannot be a barbershop owner, you can't be a boxer or a wrestler, you can't be a commercial feed distributor, you can't be an EMT. A lot of states say you can't work in the healthcare field at all if you're a felon. A lot of states say any sort of contact with kids, you can't do that. That one I understand. Security jobs, usually you can't be a security guard in any state after you've served a term of incarceration. In Florida, you can't be an acupuncturist, you can't be a speech language pathologist, you can't be a cosmetologist. A lot of states that you are required to get a license to practice some sort of employment will restrict felons from making it ineligible for them to apply for this particular licensing. So you see differences in each state, but that's just an example of an invisible punishment in that you've already served your time. So why are we trying to make it harder for you to assimilate back into population after you've been released? So in 23 states, criminal history is public knowledge, which just gives access to the average person to discriminate against you and make it harder for you to sort of get your feet once you've been released from prison. So it allows criminal history to be public record in about 23 states. The other thing that you have to consider is that a lot of states deny felons the right to serve on a jury. So this then begs the question, is it really a jury of your peers? If you are being tried for a felony conviction and no one on the jury has actually been convicted of a felony, that really is not a jury of your peers anymore. So we also see in a lot of states, in 31 states, you lose the right to vote if you are a convicted felon. So 7 states bar felons from voting for life, and this can have a larger impact than we know. It can affect the political elections by reshaping the electorate. So nationally, an estimated 5.3 million Americans are barred from voting due to felony convictions. And where this becomes an issue is that felons are drawn disproportionately from racial minorities and poor, or those of low socioeconomic status. So if most felons are minorities and are of low socioeconomic status, and that means that those people can't vote, the type of person that can vote is overwhelmingly a Caucasian person that is rich. So that means that we are reshaping the electorate by saying that you can't vote as a felon. So this means that about 1.4 million African American men, which is 13% of African American men, cannot vote. That is what is referred to as felon disenfranchisement. By not allowing this person to vote, you're disenfranchising them because of their felony status. So in 5 out of those 7 states that say you can't vote for life, a quarter of the state's population is barred from voting. So even though the turnout among turnout of voters among felons is far below that than non-felons, the National Election Study Analysis strongly suggests that felon disenfranchisement played a decisive role in the 2000 U.S. election. So it can really affect elections. So in South Carolina, a convicted felon cannot vote until they are completely done with their sentence. So that means if you're on probation or parole, you cannot vote until you are completely done with that. And basically what happens is that anybody that's incarcerated or placed on probation is given a handout by the South Carolina Department of Probation, Parole, and Pardon Services that says that this is how you restore your voting rights. In some states, it's a lot harder than it is in others. Some states require complex forms to be filled out. Usually there are fees that you have to pay. There are offices that you have to visit. during normal working business hours. And some of these people, if they find a job, they can't get the time off. So it's not as easy as simply just filling out an online form. In a lot of states, it seems like they're making it harder than it needs to be to restore this right. So in some states, you have to petition the court and you kind of have to prove your case. It really just depends on the state, but it's not nearly as simple as it would seem to restore your voting rights. There are 2 states that allow you to vote from prison using an absentee ballot. Who can guess which 2 states those are? Brian?
California and New York.
Those are the exact 2 guesses that I had in the last class, but that is incorrect. Those are good guesses, though. Who else? Where's Bernie Sanders from?
Is one of them Massachusetts?
Nope.
Vermont and somewhere else.
Yep, Vermont and Maine. Those are the 2 states where if you are in prison, you can request an absentee ballot and vote from prison. I actually had a great question in the last class. Somebody asked what percentage of inmates are actually partaking in that in those 2 states, and I don't know the answer. So I'll do a little research and let you guys know how many absentee voters in Vermont and Maine are taking advantage of that. But again, it's totally up to the state to determine if you're allowed to vote, how you go about restoring those voting rights, so on and so forth. So there are also some more recent obstructions due to the war on drugs legislation. So people that are convicted of a drug offense, some of the restrictions say you can't have access to public assistance, you can't have food stamps, you can't live in public housing. Some of the legislation says that you can't even have a driver's license. Being a foster parent, adopting a child, okay, I understand those 2. Receiving student loans. These are just examples of invisible punishment, that we're just making it harder for these people to get back on their own 2 feet after they've been incarcerated. So it depends on the state that you're in that determines the types of invisible punishment that you will be subjected to. And it also depends on the state that you're in as to the avenues for relief. So a lot of states do allow you to petition the court for relief from these civil disabilities, but the sort of hoops that you have to jump through to get these rights restored really varies by state, but it is never, ever, ever as simple as just filling out a form online. It's always much more complicated. There are usually fees involved, all kinds of forms that you have to fill out. It's like if you've ever had to go to the DMV and you stand online for 3 hours and then they tell you you forgot one form or you don't have your passport. It's kind of like that. So for instance, some of these war on drug legislation, some states have passed laws that say things like you can have your student loan eligibility restored if you pass 2 unannounced drug tests. So it really just varies by state how you can petition the court or how you can get relief from these civil disabilities. So when people ask me why it's so hard for people to just stop committing crimes when they get released from prison, this is one of the things that I point to, is that it just sets you up for failure. And not only that, when we take away fundamental rights, we make these people feel less like a member of society, which makes it easier for them to rationalize a life of crime. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about some collateral consequences. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the effect on the families. We're going to talk about the children, the effects that incarceration has on kids. Then we're going to talk about what happens when you incarcerate a father versus what happens when you incarcerate a mother. So the effects of incarceration on family are entangled in the issues of employment. The incarceration of those who have families endangers the families that they've left behind both financially and emotionally. So just looking at the kids, there are about 1.5 million children who have a parent who is incarcerated in the US right now. So not only are there massive financial problems when a parent is incarcerated, but there are a lot of emotional problems as well. So usually these kids' emotional problems are manifested in educational failures. So you'll see all of a sudden their grades start dropping. A lot of times they're manifested in excessive aggression or depression, or they just kind of withdraw into themselves and become very antisocial. And these educational failures, aggression, depression, and withdrawal, they're all the symptoms of those kids who have lost a parent due to death or divorce. So you see very similar behaviors in the kids that have a parent that's incarcerated, and the same behaviors with the parent or the kids who have lost a parent due to death, or if they've watched their parents go through a particularly nasty divorce. A lot of times these kids all act very similarly, like I said, educational failures, aggression, depression, withdrawal. Especially when we realize, like I was saying before, that most of these people are coming from and going to the same communities. These are disadvantaged communities. So especially in disadvantaged communities, these kids are already at high risk for being incarcerated themselves. Then when you incarcerate a parent and they start doing poorly in school and become aggressive or depressed or withdrawn, they're more likely to draw the attention of law enforcement. So intergenerational transmission is a phenomenon that a lot of researchers study. This means that if you have a parent that's incarcerated, you are much more likely to become incarcerated yourself. So some researchers have estimated that when your parent is incarcerated, that makes you 60% more likely to follow in their footsteps. So there's a lot of reasons why, but one of them is you're likely to be in one of those disadvantaged communities that doesn't have access to sort of the social benefits that you have in some of these more high income neighborhoods. You lose a parent, which makes single parent household is definitely a predictor of juvenile crime. The financial issues, the emotional problems, not to mention the genetics as well. But just talking about the social environment, intergenerational transmission means that when a parent is incarcerated, their kid is likely to follow in their footsteps. So when you have an incarcerated parent, that is one of the best predictors of a child's future antisocial behaviors, convictions, and subsequent incarceration. So if you're trying to do any sort of data analysis that predicts the likelihood that a child will become incarcerated themselves, if you don't have a variable that accounts for the parent's incarceration, that study is not valid at all, because that is the #1 predictor. So researchers have noticed that the collateral effect on children, they noticed that when the US got tough on crime, in reality, what they were doing was getting very tough on kids because of this intergenerational transmission. So you have to note as well that sometimes it's better when a parent is incarcerated if they had a really antisocial relationship with their family, or they were perhaps abusive, or we're just bringing a really negative environment into the home. So I'm not saying it's never a bad thing, or it's never a good thing for a parent to be incarcerated. But overall, the majority of the research indicates that when a parent is incarcerated, that is not good for the kids. So let's talk about what happens when a father is incarcerated. So research has shown that more than half of incarcerated men are parents to children under the age of 18. And this is especially important because generally males bear the majority of the family's financial burden. And in this case, they're either bringing legal or illegal income into the family. Either way, they are usually the #1 financial support in a family. So when you incarcerate a father, you are definitely putting that family into a financial tailspin. It's also not unheard of for a wife or a spouse, the wife or a girlfriend to lose a job just from the stigma of the fact that her significant other was incarcerated. So, when you imprison a father who is residing with a family, that means that the family status changes at least temporarily into a single parent family, which is also a correlate of juvenile crime. The other thing you have to consider, studies show that when a spouse is imprisoned, usually that leads to divorce. So this temporary single parent household becomes permanent. So these fathers also contribute emotionally, not just financially, to these kids. Even when they aren't living in the children's homes, the fathers can often contribute to childcare or social support for the resident parent. There was a study of 188 fathers in a maximum security facility in New York, and over 74% of them reported that they lived with their child before they were incarcerated. Other studies have estimated it's closer to 50%, but that's still the overwhelming majority. Anywhere from 50 to 75% of incarcerated fathers were living with the family when they were incarcerated. So with all this data, the most important question is it a good thing or a bad thing when we take a father out of the home to incarcerate them? And most of the research shows that it does not bode well for the family or the children. All right, let's talk about what happens when you incarcerate a mother. So, like we talked about last week, about 2/3 of incarcerated women have children under the age of 18. And this is becoming an increasingly important issue as a greater number of women are being imprisoned. Like we saw last week, the relative growth of the female prison population is outpacing the male prison population growth. Where this becomes an issue is that since women are far less likely to be incarcerated, there are less female institutions in a state than there are males. So just by way of a numbers game, that means that if you're trying to visit your mother in prison, you're going to have to drive a lot farther than if you're trying to visit your father in prison. One study indicated that on average, females are located about 160 miles further away from her family than a male inmate. So because of that, that means they're less likely to be visited by their children while they're incarcerated, which does not do well for the kids or for the mental health of the mother. So other differences is that women are more likely to be living with their children when they're incarcerated. So when you incarcerate a mother, that means that for the most part, you're going to have to find something to do with these kids. A recent study indicated that only 1/4 of female inmates reported that their child did not live with them. So when you incarcerate a mother, that means the children are more likely to be removed from the home and placed with relatives, or in worst case scenario, they go to foster care. And if you have siblings, that means that a lot of times the siblings are split up because the accommodations just don't work. But when a father is incarcerated, usually the household is not disrupted because kids are more likely to be living with their mothers. The other difference that we see, and this is quite a bit of a double standard, when a mother is incarcerated, she is much more likely to lose her parental rights. The state often takes away parental rights of a mother, but they don't do that for the father. It's much more common when a woman is incarcerated, she's going to lose her parental rights compared to when a male or a father is incarcerated. They rarely lose their parental rights. So that's just one more thing that a woman has to go through when she gets released from prison, is restoring those parental rights.
Maddie, come on.
So the other thing that you have to consider is that these substitute parents usually have unique problems. So whether that's like an aunt or an uncle or a maternal grandmother that takes these kids in, usually there's a financial burden. One study reported that 2/3 of caregivers to children of imprisoned mothers had financial problems. In general, they are eligible for fewer benefits than if you send someone into foster care. So if you're a foster parent, you get all kinds of benefits from the state. But if you try to keep that kid in the family, which is preferable, usually they're not eligible for as many benefits from the state or the federal government as someone that's a foster parent. All right. Do we have any questions about collateral consequences before we start talking about reentry issues? All right. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, we're going to talk about two of the biggest reentry problems for people that are coming home from prison. The first one is housing. So where are these people going to live? And the second one is work. Where are they going to work? So today we'll just cover housing issues. And on Thursday, we will pick that up and talk about work issues. So starting with housing, most prisoners return to living with their family members. That is the most common. But this can be a tricky and complex scenario for a couple of reasons, including the possibility that the family may not want them there, which oftentimes makes this a very temporary solution. However, when you are released from prison, your reentry counselor, as well as your parole officer, if you're being placed on parole, they want to know where you're living in advance. So say you're being released on parole and you say, I'm going to live at my mom's house. And then after 2 big fights with your mom, she kicks you out of the house. And before you can inform your parole officer that you don't live there anymore, they stop by to check on you. Well, now it looks like you've gone AWOL because you don't live there anymore. And all of a sudden you've got a technical violation, which can send you back to prison. Oftentimes the family may not want you there if you've got younger siblings and they think that you're a bad influence on them, or you have just let your family down so many times that it's upsetting for them and they don't want to watch you fail again. So a lot of times it's not as simple as moving back home with your folks or moving in with your spouse. They may not want your influence around the kids, especially if you picked up the same bad habits that you had before you were incarcerated. So about 7% say they move in with friends. This is also not an ideal situation for a couple of reasons. A lot of state laws say that the felons can't live together, or that they can't interact together, or even if you're on parole, one of the requirements is that you're not supposed to be associating with other felons. So it's highly unlikely somebody getting out of prison has a friend that's willing to let them crash on their couch that also isn't a felon. So even if your parole officer is cool with it and your state is cool with it, if you're living with another felon and you're trying to go clean, go straight, they may not have that same lifestyle in mind. They may still be very antisocial, which is kind of like waving an alcohol bottle under the nose of an alcoholic. So it tempts you to get back into that lifestyle, especially like we saw last week. If you're hurting for money, you can get back in the drug trade really quickly and make money very fast. So if you're trying to not be around those people, if you're forced to live with them, that makes it harder for you to cope. Or even say that you're an angel and that you are walking the straight and narrow, but you happen to be crashing on your friend's couch who's selling drugs. Well, your parole officer comes by and sees that, you're probably getting a technical violation and getting reincarcerated because of that. So if you can't live with your family and you can't live with your friends, a lot of parolees wind up going into a homeless shelter or people released from prison. So studies have found anywhere from 11 to 15% of people go to a homeless shelter straight from prison. Even though most released offenders don't plan on going to a homeless shelter, like we were just talking about, most of the time their housing plans are extremely unstable and pretty temporary. So because of that, 10 to 25% of people that are released from prison are homeless within a year. And a lot of researchers think that imprisonment has contributed to the size of the homeless population. So let's talk about some other options. So if you can't live with family, if you can't live with friends, and you don't want to go to a homeless shelter, what are your other options? So your first option is the private housing market. So has anybody in here ever rented an apartment before? Raise your hand if you have. So I suspected Danielle. So the last apartment that you rented, how much money did you have to pay up front just to rent that?
I don't have to do that in the military, but prior to serving, I had to, it was at least 1 or 2 months rent. So whatever that was at the
Right.
time.
So a student in my last class said that usually you have to put down your security deposit. So that's usually your first and last month's rent. Student in the last class said he had a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment for $800 a month. So that's $1,600 that he had to put down right away. So Danielle, when you applied, did you have to fill out an application, and did it ask for if you had a criminal record?
Yes.
Was there a fee just to apply or to fill out that application?
Yeah, it's usually like $50 to $100.
Exactly. So they're going to ask if you have a criminal record. So even if you can scrape together enough money to pay first and last month's rent, they can legally exclude you from renting a house with your criminal record. And that application fee, that $50 to $100, that usually they're using some of that money to run a background check on you. So if you lie, they're going to know about it. So a background check, I believe in this state, it's about $25. You do it through SLED. So that's why your application fee is about $50 to $100, is because they're making you pay for your own background check. So a lot of prisons will give you what they refer to as gate money when you're released, which is just money in your hand to help you get on your feet. Usually at maximum, that's about $150, and you can never put a down payment on an apartment for $150. That has not been the amount of money since like the 50s that goes towards an apartment. And in some states, a third of states don't provide any gate money at all. And some states will just give you like $15 worth of McDonald's vouchers, which is not going to be enough to, that's like monopoly money when you're trying to put money down for an apartment. So the private housing market is usually pretty inaccessible for someone coming out of prison. And the private housing market represents about 97% of the total housing stock in the US. So that market is highly inaccessible for somebody that's coming out of prison. So the next option is maybe they'll apply for public housing. And the problem here is the availability for public housing has never been enough. And in some states, the waiting list is so long that it is a number of years. So for instance, in New York State, the waiting list is 8 years long for public housing. In DC, it's 6 years. And if your parole officer is asking you for an address, you can't say, I'll let you know in 6 to 8 years. So a lot of big metropolitan cities, the waiting list is just too long to be accessible for these people coming out of prison. But say you live in a city where the waiting list isn't a problem, and they say the waiting list is only 10 days or something like that, or there is no waiting list, we can get you in right away. Well, you have to fill out a public housing admission or application, and federal regulations allow the Public Housing Authority to deny admission to an applicant whose habits and practices reasonably may be expected to have a detrimental effect on the residence or project environment. So basically that's fancy talk for we can reject your application if you have a criminal record, and they do it all the time. So the private housing market is usually pretty inaccessible for ex-cons. The public housing market, if the wait list doesn't get them, the admissions criteria will. So that's usually inaccessible for somebody coming out of prison. So the criminal justice system attempts to help sometimes in the form of halfway houses, but we don't have nearly as many halfway houses as we used to have. They got a lot of bad press. A halfway house basically just means, it's called a halfway house because it's considered half in, half out of prison. They allow you to live, they give you a place to live. Usually there are pretty strict rules and regulations, and they have a curfew, but you are allowed to leave during the day to go to work. And it's pretty simple for somebody to just walk right out of a halfway house. Even though they have a curfew, people just can walk away. There are no gates. And that's what's happened in a couple of states. If you Google it, there have been a lot of really gruesome stories that have hit the news in the last 10 years or so. People have walked away from halfway houses and gone on killing sprees. Oftentimes, they're also located in neighborhoods where the residents will petition to not have a halfway house there. And the further you move it outside of the city, the harder it is for these people to get to work. So they try to kind of keep them in the inner city. But a lot of the residents complain about that because they're saying it's reducing the value of their home. There's a phrase, NIMBY, which stands for not in my backyard. And a lot of people will try to get the cities to keep these halfway houses outside of the city or just close them down in general. So we don't see quite as many halfway houses as we used to in the past. About half of our states don't even use them at all anymore. So private housing market is usually inaccessible, public housing inaccessible, criminal justice system in form of halfway houses, pretty inaccessible as well. So what is left over are innovative programs, and this varies by state. So it just depends on the state that you're in and the city that you live in. There are some programs available to help out ex-cons. So I'll show you a few of them. So the two we're going to talk about, the first one is the Alston Wilkes Society. So this one is available in 4 locations. So if you don't live in Charleston, Columbia, Florence, South Carolina, or Fayetteville, North Carolina, this isn't accessible to you. But the Alston Wilkes Society is a nonprofit faith-based organization that provides help for at-risk populations. So they serve ex-offenders, veterans, families in crisis, usually domestic violence situation, like if a mother flees with her kids, or the homeless. And they have a couple of services. So the adult residential services, if they have runaway youth, they provide housing and help for them as well. Veteran services. So the adult residential, this is, it provides 24-hour supervision, housing, food, intense case management. So a term you're going to hear all semester is case management. That means that you have one sort of social worker to help you with all of the problems that you have. And people coming out of prison often have a lot of problems like housing, substance abuse problems, unemployment, anger management. Sometimes they have serious health concerns. So you can get case management at this program as well. And they offer these programs to help residents. So anger management, cultural diversity, life skills, money management classes, parenting classes, substance abuse counseling. So they offer quite a few services. Same with the youth services as well. You can see they help, this one serves males only. So I guess if you're a girl, you're shit out of luck. So this one's in Columbia, ages 11 to 21. This looks like intensive case management as well. So this is one program, but they have a limited number of spots available. So the first thing that you have to hope is that you're being released from prison in one of these cities, and you better hope they have room for you. The next option here in South Carolina is a program called Jumpstart Faith Ministry. Can you guys see that one, or is it still on the Alston Wilkes screen? Give me a thumbs up if you see Jumpstart. You see Jumpstart? Okay, good. All right, so this program is faith-based again. You're going to see that a lot. We live in the Bible Belt. And it's a program that helps ex-offenders get back on their feet. This was created by an ex-offender who found Jesus after he murdered his wife and spent 30 years in prison. He got released and started this program. It's a highly structured program. It starts on the inside, meaning you start this program before you even get released, and then it continues on the outside. So the outside program, let's see, is this the one right here? Is it showing me this? It helps them with, let's see, their donors and churches, community, current and former prisoners with reentry, community partnerships, educational, employment, healthcare, housing, family relationship. And you can see all kinds of stuff. So the outside program, low cost, safe, stable housing. We've got case management again here. This one provides transportation because a lot of these guys don't have transportation. money management training again. We've got substance abuse, spiritual growth, community engagement, so on and so forth. So a lot of times when you see these innovative programs, it's trying to help with more than one issue, because a lot of these guys have complex, multiple issues that they try to deal with, which is why we often see sort of this case management situation that happens. All right. So any questions about this before we have our 3 Jeopardy champions play today? All right, so I hope you guys are starting to see why it's not so simple for these guys to just get released from prison, pick up the pieces of their life, and not be criminals anymore. It's a lot harder than the average person thinks. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to have the Jeopardy champions play. So today we have Brian Hall. Where's Brian? There's Brian. Vincent, where's Vincent? There he is. And Olivia, I saw Olivia. Where's Olivia? There she is. All right, if you 3 will pop your mics on, we will start playing Jeopardy. Okay, here we go.
It's when one adopts the character and attitudes of fellow inmates.
Yep, I will accept that. Good job, Brian. Okay, here we go.
The Prison Rape Elimination Act.
Who said that? Vincent?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. So this you can get partial credit for. If you say Prison Rape Something Act, as long as the E is a synonym for elimination, I'll give you credit for it. I have a lot of students that say things like enhancement, which doesn't make sense. We're not trying to increase prison rape, we're trying to reduce it. So sometimes students will say Prison Rape Extinction Act. I'll give you credit for that if that's the case. All right, here we go.
The dog program.
There we go. Good job, Brian. You guys can't think of one.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi just went out. I just got back on.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Are we on the first one or no?
No, we're on the 4th one.
Gosh, okay.
A bunch of mothers.
I will accept that, Brian. All right, Olivia, I think what we'll do is see if you can just play next week too. How about that?
Okay.
All right. Okay, last one.
I recommend implementing GED programs to reduce recidivism.
Very good. I will accept that. All right, Brian is our winner. He will be back. Olivia will have you play again next week. I'll make a note of that. Please remind me if I skip right past you, but I'm going to write that down right now. So we'll just do that. If anybody's Wi-Fi cuts out while we're playing Jeopardy, we'll give you another go. All right, so make sure you guys email me to schedule a Zoom meeting so that we can work on your policy brief. And also, if you want to fill out your study guide, I'm happy to go over that for you. We have 2 weeks until our midterm. Study guide is available in our module. And I apologize about not having the Zoom link in there. I'm going to go ahead and make sure Thursday's link is in there right now. Any questions for me? All right, well, I'll see you guys on Thursday. We'll be taking quiz 5. And on Thursday, I'll remind the people who are playing Jeopardy not to take the quiz. Olivia, you will be one of them, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for better Wi-Fi. All right, see you guys on Thursday.